Hello and welcome to TerraLex Insights podcast, where our goal is to present multicultural perspectives by leading professionals. These perspectives on contemporary issues will help lawyers and business people work better together. I'm your host, Terry Pepper Gavlik, TerraLex's Chief Business Officer. Today, we're talking with Tommy Knapp, an esports strategist, podcast host, and ultimate gamer. I think I know what a few of those are, but I'm not sure I know what all of those are. However, though, Tommy didn't start out that way. So we're going to hear Tommy's origin story in his own words in a minute. But I just wanted to mention to our listeners that no matter your industry, including our lawyer listeners, the notion of reinventing yourself to take advantage of contemporary opportunities should resonate and is kind of a fascinating topic, I think, particularly for this particular environment where people aren't being able to resort to their normal practices. So let's just start with your origin story, Tommy. And by the way, welcome to the podcast. Maybe tell us a little bit about your pathway to what you're doing and exactly what it is that you're doing.
Sure. Thank you, first of all, for having me on. I appreciate that. And I think when you look at this space, I don't know if there's a traditional way to get involved. Obviously, being in the legal field, there is, right? When you're in the legal field, you typically have a trajectory and you know where you're going. I think in esports and gaming, because it's such a new field, a lot of people are making the leap over into esports and gaming now that were executives or were in other fields before. You mentioned reinventing yourself. I started out 25 years ago. I had a sport management degree out of Ithaca College, but when I graduated, there wasn't really anything in the professional sports world in Syracuse, New York, where I'm from. So I actually got involved in the travel industry for about 10, 15 years, ran my own company, took people all over the world, more than 10,000 students. I was a student tour operator, took over 10,000 kids all over the planet, Paris, Rome, New York, Washington, D.C., Toronto, and then we did college campus tours. So we were all over the place. When I met my wife down here in Fort Lauderdale, I live in Fort Lauderdale now, we decided when we had our first child that it was time to sell the business because we didn't want to be overseas when our kids were taking their first steps or saying their first words. So I then went back to what I used to tell students, and that was I meditated and thought about the things that I was either good at or really enjoyed, because I think you can do anything you want to do in this world and you can have a great quality of life. If you can sit down, meditate, and think about that. So I thought about, there was like 4 or 5 things that I wanted to do, but professional sports was one of those things. So I got involved in professional sports. I went into my network, got a job almost immediately with the Miami Dolphins. And that was my transition from the travel industry into the pro sports world. And so I started out in sponsorship and ticket sales for the Miami Dolphins, then transitioned to become the commercial director for the Fort Lauderdale Strikers, which is a pro soccer team down here in South Florida, and finally landed with the Miami Marlins and ran a program there called Baseball to Business, which was about connecting the dots between business leaders. So they recruited me to do that. I did that for 4 years. While I was there, Derek Jeter was looking at buying the team. A number of other people were as well. And I knew at that time that I may need to look for a new role, because typically when ownership changes, a lot of people will lose their jobs. So at that time, I started looking around, and because of what I was doing, I was connecting the dots between business leaders and doing a lot of what you and I are doing right now, Terry, and that was to educate. I determined that it wasn't just about networking and connecting the dots between business leaders, but I also needed to educate people on what was going on in the business world. And so I chose all these different topics. I was looking at cryptocurrency and cybersecurity. Real estate's always huge in South Florida, so we're doing things on that. And then all of a sudden, esports and gaming started coming across my desk. I was Jerry Jones and Robert Kraft and Mark Cuban and the Cronkies and Leontises and all these big traditional pro sports team owners were getting involved in the space. I was like, why are they spending millions and millions to get involved in the space? So I started looking at it closely. And then, of course, big name celebrities and athletes like Michael Jordan and Shaq and J-Lo and A-Rod and all these guys were getting involved too. So I started looking at the space. My kids were 8 and 11 at that time. They were gaming a ton, and Fortnite is a game that had just come out. And so I was having conversations with my wife and all the moms about how do we stop these kids from gaming so much, because they were taking so much time gaming. And I wasn't the person saying we should stop them from gaming. I was like, what is it? Why is it so engaging? And so I was looking at that space and saying, I think I need to get involved in what's going on in esports and gaming, and what's the best way to do that. And the best way to do that to me was to surround myself with experts and leaders in the space. So I continued doing what I was doing as far as bringing people together, but I also started creating a network of leaders and experts in space to learn what was going on in esports and gaming. And we can kind of dive into that, but that was a very quick story. There's much more involved with it, but I know we
It's
only
interesting, though, that you looked around. And so just to set the platform for our listeners, gaming seems a little bit obvious, things like Fortnite and games like that. What is esports involved in? What kinds of things are we looking at there?
Yeah, well, great question, because first of all, that's my role when I got in was to educate myself, but then now is to educate, I always say, teachers and administrators, executives and parents, not really as much children, but I need to educate the space. And so one of the things that people need to understand is that gaming, the industry of gaming, think of as more like sports. So when you say sports, it's not just football, it's not just basketball, it's not just baseball or tennis or golf, it's all of it, right? It's everything. And gaming is a massive industry. Gaming itself, they say anyway, from everything I've read, is bigger than the entertainment industry, meaning music and TV and movies. So it's massive. It's a $180 billion industry, depending on what you read. Well, esports is really just the top of that pyramid. So esports is what you think of as the professional leagues. Really, it's the competitive side of things. And what they've done is they've now created professional leagues and professional matches and tournaments, things like that. So that's really esports, and that's why you'll hear them say, well, the esports is now $1 billion industry, because it's just a fraction of the gaming industry. However, it's brought a lot of eyeballs, right? A lot of interest, because just like the NFL is what you see with football, but football is so much bigger than the NFL. That's what draws all the attention, and it really is the sexy part of the industry. So esports is that for gaming. And when we say esports, though, it's again, you use that term a lot, and people need to understand that it's saying sports doesn't mean just the NFL. Esports is not just Fortnite. In fact, Fortnite might not even be considered. Sometimes people have there's a discussion and a debate about if Fortnite is really an esport. But League of Legends, Overwatch, Call of Duty, CSGO, Rocket League, there's just numerous titles that are considered esports in that bigger gaming industry.
Well, and even in TerraLex, we have a industry sector team of sports and entertainment, and I know those lawyers are increasingly seeing clients need assistance on esports and gaming. So it is even burgeoning within the legal space. So interesting.
Oh, it's absolutely massive. And I tell people when I speak at different events around the country, I say, you just, whatever you're doing right now, I don't care if you're in sales, I don't care if you're in marketing, if you're in human resources, if you're in the legal field, if you're in the medical field, get involved in esports, because esports and gaming, that industry is so massive and it's global that it needs all of these experts right now. So you're seeing a lot of people come over from traditional sports, but you're also seeing people come over from the diet nutrition area. You're seeing all types of legal needs right now. Massive legal needs, from, IP to the athletes and the content creators themselves need representation, mergers and acquisitions. I mean, it's just anything you can think of right now, esports and gaming needs it. And there's also a tremendous amount of crossover, right? So I just had somebody on my podcast the other day from Riot Games, and they're talking about the music industry. So the music industry and esports are constantly crossing over right now. So you're having all these hip hop artists, which are releasing their singles in games.
Interesting.
Because when you think about Fortnite. Fortnite might have, and I don't know, I could be exaggerating, but Fortnite might have 200 million players around the world, right? So if you release your single in a Fortnite game, you're now releasing it to 200 million people. Whereas if you release it on a radio station, that capacity, right, their reach might be, is much, 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 much smaller. So you're seeing esports and gaming being used for, advertising and entertainment and music.
Interesting. Well, so you've reinvented yourself into esports and gaming, and I know that you host a podcast. I know you're an ultimate gamer and a strategist. Tell us what a day in your life is like. What do you do?
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why my job is so fun, right? When I got into esports and gaming, every single day is different and unique. This is great to jump on your podcast and spend time with you. The Ultimate Gamer is actually a property that I work for. I'm a consultant for the Ultimate Gamer, so I'm wearing, their gear right now. But my podcast is through the Ultimate Gamer. The Ultimate Gamer itself is a competition to find the best gamer in the world, and so They've trademarked the Ultimate Steve Suarez, who's the CEO, has trademarked that. And again, talking about law, right? Trademark law. And so we're finding the best gamer on the planet, best gamer on the globe, best gamer in the world, best gamer in the universe. I think all four of those are trademarked. And instead of just finding the best gamer in one title, or say like LeBron James is one of the top basketball players in the world, it's finding not just the best basketball player, but the best athlete in the world, which if you think about the Olympics is more like a decathlete, right? You have to put that person through this gauntlet of different activities to find out who's the best athlete in the world. And then we crown that in the Olympics, we crown that decathlete kind of as that person. We're doing the same thing with the Ultimate Gamer. Instead of just being the best Fortnite player, the best League of Legends player, the best NBA 2K player, the best FIFA player, you have to prove yourself across all these different modalities. And then we're crowning that person as the top best player in the universe. And so we'll do that on an annual basis. It'll be a month-long qualifying tournament. And then after that, there'll be 4,000 people from around the planet. So from anywhere in the world, it's a free competition that can compete in that. And it's $1 million prize pool. So that's the Ultimate Gamer, which is the property that I work for. But then we have all these other satellite or divisions, if you will. And the podcast and content is one of those areas that we're working on in the Ultimate Gamer. So that's where I host my podcast.
Well, I know I've seen some specials about gaming where there's these giant, almost like conventions and the competitions. How is it possible to take that online in the world, in the pandemic world where people are inside? And does that add additional issues about, accuracy, fairness, or things like that?
Yeah, a great question. When I first heard you ask it, I was thinking more of like a dream hack, which is a big event where maybe 20, 30, 40, 50,000 people over the course of a weekend will come to an event like that. And it's broken out in a number of different facets, right? There's an educational component. So you'll have business people talking about different things in the esports and gaming space, but then you'll also have competitions going on that are live and that are there. And it's a controlled environment, like you said. So, those events are taking place. There's been a pivot and they're happening online. And I think there is esports and gaming has the capability of doing that, unlike some other businesses which have really struggled. So it has had that opportunity. There are parts of that you certainly do miss, right? Like just like you and I doing the podcast right now. We're blessed because we can do this podcast, but it's also a different environment if you and I are sitting next to each other, right? It's the same thing with these events. So they're happening online. They're still able to monetize them to some degree, but they're different. They look different today. When you talk about the competitive side, which I think was the second half of that question, really, there's a challenge right now, because when you bring 10 athletes together and you play in a competition and you have 5 computers here and 5 computers here, everybody's using the same internet, everybody can have the exact same settings, then it's pretty, I don't say it's easy to manage because it's still challenging to manage.
It's more
technology.
fair, probably.
Right, but it's very fair because you have that and you can see it and you can make those changes on the fly. When you've got one team that's competing in Miami, competing against another team that's in New York or, Shanghai, or, the internet, the servers are different, the settings. So I think it is challenging, but just like anything, I think because people realize and understand they have to deal with those changes and what's going on today, we are. And I think there's still, it's still so much about fair play and making sure that there is integrity in the gaming. But you're still, just like anything, right? I mean, there's always people out there that are trying to cheat the system and trying to figure out a way to, to give themselves an advantage. So, but it's happening, and gaming has continued to flourish during this time. There's probably actually a lot of people that have gone to entertainment in the gaming space that may not have done that before, simply because it was really the only thing we had for 3 or 4 months until pro sports came back online recently.
Yeah, I imagine that for every downside, there's an upside, and the upside is it is accessible to a lot more people when you don't have to travel or spend the money to, attend these giant events or things like that just to get into it. So interesting. It's very similar to what we see in our network. It's sort of leveled the playing field. When we did our virtual global meeting, we had 3 or 4 times as many people as normal because people didn't have to travel to come to it. So there is an upside to every downside.
Yeah, you're so right. I think the second podcast I had with a gentleman named Joey Brander. Joey travels all the time, and he said, his productivity had gone way up because he was able to have a lot more meetings and a lot more discussions. He wasn't able to shake hands, but he was able to do that because he wasn't traveling nearly as much.
Right.
So yeah, 100%. I agree with you.
Yeah. So that's a couple of challenges that you've identified. What other kinds of challenges or opportunities are you seeing in the esports and gaming industry?
Well, to me, I mean, that's one of those questions that's so broad, right? Because I think, as I mentioned, I find that the biggest challenge really is breaking it down and finding something that you can focus on. So if you're in the legal field, I wouldn't try to be everything to everybody, right? I would try to look at one or two or three things that you either really enjoy or you really are good at. And then I would take those into the esports and gaming space. And the reason I say that is because all those events that I travel to, I run across people all the time. And somebody may be starting, for instance, like myself, I was looking at the grassroots level. There was no grassroots level, and there still really isn't in esports and gaming, meaning when you look at a typical traditional sports pyramid, you've got, if you take soccer, for instance, you've got your pro soccer leagues. So you've got the Premier League over in Europe and in England, and then you've got La Liga, and you've got all these top soccer leagues. And then from there, it breaks down to semi-pro or leagues that are getting into the pros, and then your college, high school, and all the way down to your grassroots. With the grassroots level in soccer is a $15 billion industry. And so when I was looking at that, I was like, well, wait a second, my kids can go play youth soccer, they can play rec soccer, and then they can go to travel soccer and competitive, and then they can go to the academy level, and then they go to high school, and then they can go to college. But they can't do that in Fortnite. They were playing Fortnite just as much as they were playing soccer. It's like it doesn't exist in Fortnite. They can't compete. They can compete with anybody around the world, but it's nobody has put it together or organized it. It's not in an organized fashion. So that's a massive industry right now that nobody's really kind of plugged into. And it's not because people don't know about it. It's just simply because it's such a nascent industry, right? The pro leagues just started 5-10 years ago. College leagues have just started like 4 years ago and are building out. Same thing with high schools right now down here in South Florida. So the youth, you'll see that happening at the grassroots level down here. So that to me is a great area for people to get involved, right? Because we need that. We need some organization at that level to help build the pyramid. So the question, I think you could say right now anything to me, and I would say yes. I think
it's an opportunity.
That's an opportunity. That's someplace you should get involved in. One of the things I like to talk about is, and just because it's one of those that I think really clicks quick with people is when you look at the medical field, right? So one of the areas that people don't think about very often is our kids are sitting, and you and I are sitting, and we don't even realize it, but in front of these blue screens, right? This blue light is emanating from our screens. And so with our children, they're sitting there. So about 2 years ago, I met with the eye doctor for the Florida Panthers, and he started getting into esports and gaming as well. And he told me one thing. He said, Tommy, these kids sit down and game, and you think about their eyes. He said, people's eyes are degenerating on a much younger age these days because of how much time they sit in front of screens. So they really should wear these glasses that can stop 95% of blue light from coming into their eyes. And then he used this term that I absolutely loved, and I thought I had that already always listening going on. He said, I use this 20-20-20 concept. When he said 2020, I was just like, of course, anybody's playing the game has 20/20 vision. Yeah. And he's like, no, not 20/20 vision. He said, when you sit down and game for 20 minutes, you should then stand up and look at something 20 feet away for 20 seconds. And I was like, oh, okay, why? And he said, well, because your eye is like a muscle. And just think about like if you're in the gym and you're flexing all the time. Well, when your eye is playing, it's always flexing. So it's straining. You're creating strain on your eye. And so what a great, right? How simple is that? 20-20-20. Yeah, simple to apply that. Any parent can remember, any child can remember, and it helps your eyes. And then we talked more about blue light, but I think that's one of those areas when you think about the medical field, whether it's your eyes, your back, your ears, or your wrists, there's just massive opportunity in that space right now as well.
Well, I think all of us are spending so much more time online that's a great tip, whether you're a gamer or just on Zoom all day long, like some of us are for meetings and things like that. When we're done, I'm going to go stare out 20 feet for 20 seconds.
Right. Yeah. Go. And what's interesting is I remember, and I don't know if you've heard of Ninja, but Ninja is somebody, if you haven't, or if you have, but if listeners haven't, that they should start looking at some of these content creators like a Ninja. And so we talk about monetizing, right? The opportunity to monetize. Ninja, when he first signed, I think he signed with Red Bull, and they came out with a headband. And I was thinking, whatever, a headband, I don't know how many kids are going to wear a headband when they're out there gaming. But maybe, that's not a bad merch play. But what about the glasses? I mean, Ninja, man, what if Ninja just wore the glasses and I don't know who the partner would be that's creating the glasses, but to me, what a great endorsement, right?
Sure.
Because parents look at that as, okay, you're trying to protect my kids' eyes. My kids, I wasn't sure, right? When I first got the glasses for my kids for Christmas like 2 years ago, they love them. Like as soon as they got them, it was like, and I was surprised. Like I didn't know that they would want to wear glasses, but they looked at it more like as a pilot. A pilot puts on really cool aviator glasses. So I think that right there is a massive, massive industry, because if you think about they say 3 billion people are gaming on this planet. Well, if you have these blue light glasses and you can get them into 3 billion people's hands and on their face, that's a massive market.
I'm excited. Maybe I might need to go out and create some of these. It reminds me a little bit of what's going on with face masks now. The more you can see the people that someone might hero worship or admire wearing a face mask, the more likely other people are to wear face masks. And I think the glasses is a good analogy in your industry, in your space.
Yeah, for sure. And I agree with you with those face masks. Like there's just the 99 cent, right? The blue and white, like medical mask that I typically wear when I go out. But now I'm starting to see like all these designer masks.
Oh yeah, I have probably 10 cool little design masks
Right.
at work when I went on a binge ordering them.
Yeah, and they're actually pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
They're like when you go out and see, like when somebody has a cool one, you immediately be like, oh, that mask is pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So just sort of as a wrap up and keeping with this idea about how you reinvented yourself, and I know you talked about the fact that you educated others about, so that we become more acceptable and gaming would be more understood and acceptable. If someone who's listening to this podcast wants to start to become more knowledgeable or understand the space more, I know they can listen to your podcast, and I'm happy to let you say how they can do that or what the name of the podcast is. But what besides that, what are some other things as well?
Well, my podcast called All About the Game, presented by the Ultimate Gamer. We have really, it's one of the areas where I shine, I think, is that I know a lot of people. And so I'm able to get a lot of really, really strong people on the podcast. So people that have been in esports and gaming, a gentleman like Wim Stocks, who's been in since the 70s and was part of Virgin Gaming and is now, the CEO of the Collegiate Star League as well as World Gaming. I mean, somebody like that, you can listen to him, and he's a legend in the space. I mean, I could listen to him myself and not even ask him a question, right? I could just listen to him for 3 or 4 hours because of the amount of knowledge he has. But I've had legal representation. I've had a number of lawyers on. I've had 2 or 3, 4 lawyers on. I've had publishers on. So there's a lot of good, right, listening to podcasts, and so certainly I think listening to All About the Game would be good. But I go to the Esports Observer, I go to Newzoo, I go to right now YouGov is a great space to go to get information. Nicole Pike came over from Nielsen to YouGov, and the amount of information that they have on sponsorship and media rights and just the eyeballs that are coming in is phenomenal. And I think from what I remember of our podcast when we talked, they are able to really get much more granular these days than, like, for instance, a Nielsen TV rating, which was very, right, I won't say generic, but there's 5,000 households in all of America that had, this Nielsen device on it that they would, say, okay, well, if that many people are, watching, then they just exponentially kind of increase that. Right now, you can get much more granular because they have the access to, all these technologies through the computers. So I think those are great spaces. And then the Business of Esports podcast, and I give those guys a lot of love. William Collis and Paul Dawalibi, Arda Ocal was also involved with that when they first started. I listened to those guys every single day when I first got involved because they're the way that they were able to pick apart, and they kind of pick topics. My podcast is different. I have a guest on like you're having me on right now, and we talk about whatever that person, their expertise is. They choose topics in the esports and gaming space that are current events, and then they pick them apart and they dig in really deep. And they're brilliant. They're very, very smart guys. So I would definitely recommend the Business of Esports as a place to go to get some information as well. I think podcasts are great. But the thing, and to be honest with you, Terry, 3 years ago when I would just Google it, right? I would Google esports news, and I'd get some news here and there. There's so much information out there today. And if you wake up at 4 or 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, whatever, if you're an early riser and you hit esports news, and you'll get so much information. And again, that's why to me it's so exciting and interesting, because it's not just about the esports and gaming space. It's about the legal space, right? It's about the entertainment space. It's about education. There's so much going on right now, whether it's Black Lives Matter or other cause related. We're involved with UNICEF. We're involved with the Christopher Reeves Foundation. There's so much going on. There's so much good in the world that is happening. And there's also a lot of gamifying the space of education right now. There's just so much happening.
Which has to happen, I would assume. Since
I'll give
virtual.
you a great example that, and I shared this with a bunch of moms because that are close to me, because they still, are very much about like too much gaming, get outside and play, that kind of thing. But my son came to me about 3 weeks ago, my older one, 14 years old, and he told me about Minecraft. Minecraft is a big game. And I know all about Minecraft, but he said there's a gentleman, and I can't remember his name off the top of my head. I think it's Pippin, it's something, 123 or something, right? So he is creating the world on a one-to-one ratio through Minecraft. So the entire planet, he's building out the entire planet in Minecraft in a 1-to-1 ratio. And I was like, what? That sounds amazing. And he said, yeah. And so he's put it online. And I was like, that would take forever. Well, he's got 120,000 people now that are helping him build out the planet. And my son is one of those. He's helping build out Fort Lauderdale. But when you watch it, and when we get off this podcast, I would recommend for anybody, go watch it. Go watch Minecraft global build. Google something like that and Pippin, and it'll come up. And it's a 10-minute video. And when you look at the math, so they to figure out how to do this, it was super complex. I mean, like crazy complex as far as the arithmetic, the math behind it. And so they ended up getting 2 or 3 of the most brightest minds in the world to help them figure out the mathematical equations and algorithms to be able to make this happen, right? And I was like, wow, I was blown away. And I mean, these people are brilliant. And so my kid is now talking with these people. And then you think about the geography, right? You just think about the geography that you have to learn, and the engineering and the ability to build out all these buildings. So, when you talk about education through gaming, I mean, it just blew me away. And so I think for anybody that's not sure about what's going on in gaming, if they just take a look at like a video like that, they can say, wow, I had no idea that this is the level of this goes in. And the last thing I'll say, because I said I apologize.
No, it's interesting.
Yeah,
it's actually
when I talk about
fascinating.
Yeah, so I had Kevin Wazalewski on not that long ago. He's the CEO of the Origin PC, and they make customized PCs. And he was talking about, I asked him, because he's a huge gamer, and he was talking about building the games and game design and game development. And when you think about it, when somebody makes a movie, the millions and millions of dollars it takes to do a big production movie. Well, that movie, once it's done and it's in the can, that's it. I mean, it's done, right? And you and I could watch the same movie 5, 10, 15 times, but it's always the same. Well, in gaming, it's always different. And not only is it always different, so that you might have whatever that game is, the general game is going to be the same, and the objective is probably going to be similar. But every time you play it, it's different. It's unique every single time. And the other thing is when you play it, and this is when I started going, no wonder kids and people get so engaged in gaming, but you're the protagonist. When you watch a movie or you listen to a song, you're listening to somebody else or watching something that somebody else created. When you're in a game, somebody created something, but now you're the protagonist. You decide everything in that game. You decide where you go. You decide what you do. And so it blew me away. I was like, wait a second, no wonder, because it really is like you are leading a second life. I mean, you have your own life, but in this game, you have this other life because you're making all the decisions in that. And I find it fascinating. And I don't find a ton of time to sit down and game. I choose to game with my children when I can because I just want to learn what they're doing and I want to be involved with them. but I can certainly see why people get so,
Yeah,
they love
for
gaming
sure.
so much. Yeah, it's
It's actually, it's in what you just were describing is analogous to some, there are some law firms around the world that are really focusing on unique customer experiences. And it reminds me of the unique gaming experience. There's probably some real lessons that can be learned about, tailoring so that the customer or the client controls the experience they have, and it's not just a one size fits all solution. So,
yeah.
and that wasn't me stretching to try to connect the dots here. I think that's a
Right.
real,
Yeah, I
that's
think
for
it's really
real.
yeah.
So, and that actually leads to probably a final question, since we're kind of running short on time, which is, I assume this isn't just a United States phenomenon, but that gaming is global, because we do have listeners from, over 100 countries around the world, and opportunities are the same. I imagine, just because it's online, that it's a leveled playing field. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yeah, when you talk about level playing field, I mean, as far as the competitive side, I mean, that's a good question. I don't, when you look at the Far East, I mean, Korea and China and some of those countries are known in certain games, especially, to be just the best in the world, right? That's not in every single game, but yeah, when you talk about, and again, there's so many different things I can go, different directions I can go right now, but to give you, for instance, Dr. Debbie Lemon, who's out at Olone College in California, she was built out the esports program there. And she ended up wanting to talk about curriculum. They're adding curriculum in, because esports and gaming right now is such a massive industry and such a great opportunity, but there's really not that much as far as education goes to go into this space. So I may be misrepresenting this to a certain degree, but I think, generally I think this is true. She ended up, talking to a bunch of people in Japan, because they had already started a curriculum in Japan. And so the reason I bring that up is because the kids at Olone and the kids at Japan talk two completely different languages, right? They speak English in Japan. Now, Japanese in Japan, I'm sure, maybe some of those kids speak English as well. But the point is that they were able to communicate through the games. They started gaming and they were communicating through the games. So when you talk about, any traditional sport, like American football is typically here in America, and we've tried to expand that into other countries, but hasn't really become ubiquitous in every other country. They've got rugby, or they've got Australian rules football, or other things. Basketball and soccer, I think, are more international. But gaming, when you talk about gaming, it's completely global, it's completely international, and people can speak the language of that game very quickly. So my kid right now can sit down and wake up this morning, 11 years old, can sit down and play Fortnite against somebody in Malaysia and somebody in Brazil and somebody in France, and every single continent. And I'll make that last point. That was one of the most exciting things to me, I think, when I talked about this, when I started learning more about the space. And that was my 14-year-old 2 summers ago was sitting down and playing with 3 kids. And we always tell him we want to know who he's playing with online, because that's one of the areas that we need to be concerned about for children, right? So he was like, oh, I'm playing with Caden. Well, Caden lives in Rio Vista, which is 2 miles away. Playing with Luke. Luke lives in Victoria Park, which, again, is like 1.5 miles, 2 miles away. And then he said, Omri. And I said, Omri's in Israel. He's like, yeah, so what? I'm like, you're talking to Omri right now. They're on their headphones just like you and I. And he was talking to Omri. And I was like, wait a second. When I was growing up, you had to call. If you wanted to talk to somebody in Israel, you had to call long distance, and it might cost $5 a minute.
Yeah.
When
I was growing up, you couldn't even do that. You had to have a pen pal and write letters.
Right? And here they are. They're just playing Fortnite, and they're talking to each other through their headsets real time. And I was like, wow, this is really unbelievable when you think about how quickly globally barriers are just torn down and how everybody can communicate, like that. My podcast I've done with people in Stockholm, in Kuala Lumpur, in Brazil, I mean, all over the world. And it's just like you and I are talking right now. It's amazing. So I know we're talking about that's Zoom and that's technology, but it's in the gaming industry. And that's one, I'll end on that. That's one thing I would suggest, whether you're an attorney, whether you're a parent, whether you're, in a business world, I would start to make sure that you understand the up and comers are communicating completely differently than we did.
Absolutely.
And I think about like what you and I just said. I mean, for you and I, it was a dial telephone and a cord, and then we went to these cell phones, and now we're on Zoom. But my kids and a lot of them are communicating through the games themselves. So Epic Games, which owns Fortnite, the fear for like some companies. I remember Reed Hastings from Netflix saying he wasn't worried as much about Disney and maybe, let's say Viacom, or, I can't remember some of the but he said Epic Games, because all the kids are spending all of their time communicating through that medium now. I can't call my kid if I want to I can call him right on my phone, but the quickest way would be for me to jump online on Fortnite and then chat with him through Fortnite. Yeah, it's amazing.
Well, thank you, Tommy. I actually realized while you were just talking about that I'm a gamer. I do play online backgammon, so I must be an online gamer. So,
yeah, that and in a gaming world, they like talk about authenticity all the time, and I needed to do that. I said, I don't really game that much, but then I thought about when I was growing up, and I thought about Words with Friends, and all these different. So they say there's 3 billion people that play games around the planet, and whether it's Candy Crush or like any of those games I mentioned earlier, or like you just said, almost everybody's a gamer.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. This has been extremely interesting and educational for me, and I'm pretty sure it'll be very educational for a lot of our listeners. And I hope everyone will check out your podcast and some of the other resources that you suggested. And have a great day. Thank you, Tommy.
You too. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Terry. Ciao.